shall the Lord be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and comely for those that escape of Israel. And it shall come to pass that he that is left in Zion, and he that remains in Jerusalem, shall be called holy, even everyone that is counted among the living in Jerusalem. Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. Continuing today in Genesis. We're still in chapter 4. Oh, let's get this straight down here. All right, there we go. Still in chapter 4. But, we're just at the end here. As always, I feel like there's so much that could be said about all of it. As I pass, I lament its passing, all of it. I don't think we're going to read the whole of the chapter. Cain and Abel, the mystery of iniquity. There was a question. I was responding to it. And mostly what I said in this particular question was those are great questions because they alone inspire thought. But it makes me think of the idea of the mystery of iniquity. The mystery of iniquity. That there's just something, the mystery of iniquity doth already work. Only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. There's a restraint of evil. There is a acceleration of evil. Like if you look at like Pharaoh, when the Lord hardened his heart. At times, God will give people over to the passions and lusts that they pursue. Merely in confirmation of the evil that's in them. And other times he will inhibit it and turn us from it. And there's a mystery as to, I don't know. Well, I don't know what the mystery of iniquity exactly is, except for perhaps in relation to the Antichrist. But if it's something about the human heart also, there's something there for contemplation anyway. So let's, like I said, I don't know all the answers, that's for sure. So Cain has been driven out, and we're going to pick up with the beginning of his family, and we're going to read right through chapter 5 because we're going to get into that. Okay, so we've got the mark. Okay, and Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. And unto Enoch was born Irad. And Irad begat Mehujael. And Mehujael begat Methusael. And Methusael begat Lamech. And Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. And Ada bare Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. And Lamech said unto his wives, Ada and Zillah, Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. Hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, truly Lamech 70 and 7-fold. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth, for God said, She hath appointed me another seed, instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Seth, to him also, there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam, in the day when they were created. And Adam lived 130 years, and begat a son in his own likeness, after his image, and called his name Seth. And the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. And all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. And Seth lived 105 years and begat Enos. And Seth lived after he begat Enos 807 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. And Enos lived 90 years and begat Canaan. And Enos lived after he begat Canaan 15 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enos were 905 years, and he died. And Canaan lived 70 years, and begat Mahalaleel. Or whatever. Sorry, Mahalaleel. And Canaan lived after he got Mahalaleel. Mahalaleel. Have I always been saying that wrong? Anyways, 840 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. And Mahalaleel, all right, that's how I'm going to say it, lived 65 years and begat Jared. And Mahalaleel lived after he begat Jared 830 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Mahalaleel were 895 years, and he died. That one just kills me. And Jared lived in 160 and 2 years, and begat Enoch. And Jared lived after he begat Enoch 800 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. And Enoch lived 65 years, and begat Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Methuselah lived 180 and 7 years, and begat Lamech. And Methuselah lived after he begat Lamech 782 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. And Lamech lived 182 years and begat a son, and he called his name Noah, saying, This same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord hath cursed. And Lamech lived after he begat Noah 595 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. And Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay, that gives us quite a long. Now back to the Cain family, Cain's family and his descendants. You know, there is this incident of the. I had something else in my mind. Okay, no, not that. Let's just go on. I have lots of things in my mind. To tell you the truth, there's so much to be talked about here. So he says, Lamech, after he fathers this remarkable family with the first recorded incident of polygamy, and what I find interesting is that, like I said, they have these very specific, like someone pointed out, very specific trades associated with each of these families. But also, it indicates a sort of this person is an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. So, I mean, that is a very competent individual. You know what I mean? And it's saying something more. Like, the descendants of Cain are, you could say they're evil, but I mean, the whole world is going to be filled with violence. Virtually everyone is giving themselves over to wickedness. Well, this little, whatever. Paul cut it out. They're giving themselves over to it. That's what's coming in the days of Noah. Men begin to call upon the days of the Lord, it says. They call on the name of the Lord. Sorry, the days of the Lord. What am I talking about? In those days, men did begin to call on the name of the Lord. That's getting down a bit. And you wonder what that means in relationship. Well, were they not calling on his name prior to that? And what does that mean? We'll talk about that in a second. But Lamech, that, like I said, it's an indicative of a kind of like the knowledge that you can, like, it's noted many times in Scripture. The wicked often prosper. And it drives people up the wall sometimes because they say, how can this be that the wicked get ahead? And it's a lot like, well, how can this be that? Why does God set a mark on Cain? Why does God forbid the pulling up of the tares? Now, and he says in the parable that you might root up some wheat while rooting up the tares. But the thing is, the word of God is sharp. It's a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. It can tell. You know what I mean? Like, the Lord knows the difference. He knows who's a tare and who's the wheat, but he forbids their rooting up. He says, let them grow together till the harvest. Now, men and angelic reapers might make mistakes because not everyone knows the privy counsels of God. That which looks like a tare, like Cain, or like the Apostle Paul, who may appear at first glance to be an enemy of God, they can be turned, right? But there is, the wicked can prosper in the world. It happens, and God has set it so. He put a mark on Cain because he didn't want Cain rooted out. He was going to leave the murderer in place. Though murderers generally are going to be, it says that they are the penalty for murder is that man should die. And Cain recognized that immediately, right? Because he said, whoever finds me is going to want to kill me because they're going to say, we can't trust you. You killed your own brother. But God has promised vengeance. Now Lamech, seeing this, comes to his wives at some point. Like I said, there's this, it's semi-chronological. That's what I would say about a lot of this. It's semi-chronological because there's often little asides. There's often little parenthesis. I mean, because it's not chronological because at verse 5 we go back to Adam. You know what I mean? So I mean chapter 5, right? It's not entirely chronological. We go back and forth a little bit. There's a little fits and starts. There's a little, wait, let's go back and let's look at that. Let's go back and let's look at that. And so that's understandable. But anyways, he says, if Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. So he thinks that's plausible. And maybe it's because of the total lack of understanding of why God would do this. I think he's just looking at it as like, well, I think he's justifying his actions. That's why I've always taken it. Because he's saying, this was to my wounding. I don't know if it means, there's two ways to interpret that in my mind. At least the way it's translated in the King James, it sounds like this killing cost me something, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, it hurt me to kill him. And I don't think he meant that either physically or metaphorically. Well, maybe like in a sense of like, I don't know what it could have cost him. That's the problem. I'm not sure. Now, the idea of, like, if it's not a literal hurt. If it's a literal hurt, then it's very obvious. Someone perhaps attacked him or whatever. Someone hurt him and he slayed him. And, I've often read negatively into that because, it could be read as self-defense, right? Or it could be read as an escalation, meaning, not tit for tat, but, a life for an eye sort of an attitude. Like, he wounded me, so I killed him. That's not, eye for an eye exactly, right? And so he's saying, it's well known that Abel hadn't done anything. Abel didn't do anything to wound Cain other than perhaps wound his pride by being better than he was, and that's always a real tough thing to swallow is when we have pride, and we all have a little bit of it probably, otherwise if we don't have some sort of mechanism in us that sort of says, take care of yourself. What you do and say matters. I mean, not exactly pride, but I'm gonna fix that fan. Sorry, I'm gonna mute this. Well, I'm not gonna mute it. Actually, I'm gonna leave it up. I just gotta touch my video card. Put my hand into the open case of the computer and play with that little fan. There we go. Yes, sirree. It doesn't. It stopped doing that for a long time, and then it started up again recently. I don't know if it's a wintertime thing. I recently had it cleaned, and I see I wisely did not mute myself, so I'm not. There's no reason to keep you out of that fun little bit. All right. So he says, so he has this attitude of, I should, if Cain, there's no reason for, let me get this, where does it go? There we go. That's better. I was trying to get in the middle of the screen. So if this vengeance shall be taken on Cain's behalf for, a murder that was over wounded pride, I think it's more likely here that Lamech thinks that his wound being more real, perhaps, justifies murder. And certainly, I understand that. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know how to interpret it, because if you interpret it as self-defense, then he's not doing anything wrong. A man, but he doesn't say someone who was trying to kill me. He said a man who wounded me. So I see that as like, well, what did he do? Steal one of your cattle or something like that. That's not necessarily a reason to kill a man. Now, if you think if a man is coming at you with a sword intent on your murder, or you can only presume he's intent on your murder, and so you defend yourself with whatever force necessary to stop them, I would say. I wouldn't expect vengeance from God for it. Well, I mean, if I get the point. Like, if someone defends themselves, they shouldn't be taken vengeance on. That's understandable. Also, there was in the law, if a man accidentally killed someone, let's say like, there was no foul play. It was just some genuine accident. Not. We have a lot more nuance in our law as far as negligence, and there was an aspect of negligence, right? If a man's beast kills another man or kills another man's beast, and he can't be held responsible unless this was a known thing, like this animal's been a problem and he hasn't taken care of it, then he is responsible. So there was stuff like that. But the question, it's kind of interesting. One of the questions in the comments was about, Cain and Abel offer sacrifice. Where did they get this knowledge, right? It doesn't say. Obviously, they had some idea of, that's why I speak of it in general terms, because it's like, what is he doing? What is he trying to perform? Well, he brings an offering. Of the fruit of the ground, yes. The first things of the flock, yes. But like, where is the not well happening? Is it inside? A lot of it is, because out of the heart proceeds evil thoughts, murders, fornications. That's what the Lord Jesus affirmed. That's why Cain's countenance falls first. First, it's inside. From the beginning, even in Genesis, we see that the heart is the seat of evil, because that is where the knowledge of good and evil has come to rest. That that is kind of where it is. We have taken it in, and now the consequences just unfold. And so, verse 25, we come to the end of the parenthesis of Cain's genealogy. It's a parenthesis where we talk about Cain because he killed Abel. It's remarkable. And until you get down to verse 25, we really don't pick up again. You're basically from about the halfway here, you could pretty much cut all that out. Not to remove it from the Bible, but as far as like, you could read past all that that's like in a big parentheses. And then here we go. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son and called his name Seth. For God said, she hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel whom Cain slew. Why do I say that? all that, why I said about the parentheses. It's not that important. It's not there in the King James. And, all punctuation is added by man. But things often exist in a parenthetical state. The Apostle Paul makes little aside remarks all the time in his epistles. And they dutifully place the parentheses around them because we detect his intention to kind of say something that's a little on the side, like a side story. And the story of Cain slaying Abel, while integral to the story, it is not integral to Adam's genealogy. Because people will say to things like, Cain isn't in Adam's genealogy. It's like, well, in verse 1 he sure is. And they point out, in chapter 5 he isn't. And neither is Abel because he died, and neither is Cain because he was a murderer. And so he was excluded. This is not the first. Reuben was excluded from the right of the firstborn because he slept with one of his father's wives. Not his own mother or anything weird like that, but one of his father's concubines or something. Reuben did that, and for that was one of the things cited. You went up into your father's bed. It's going to be here in Genesis, right? It was cited as why he as firstborn did not receive the firstborn's blessing. Though unlike Cain, he wasn't driven from the family. And Cain was literally driven out. And he was going to be a fugitive and a vagabond. That's not a son. You know what I mean? Like, that's not, like, from whom? He starts his own family and they seem to be together, right? Seem to be. Quite probably are. That's what I would immediately begin using my own family to start build up my own civilization, apart from that of Adam and the people who had not at least gone that deep into sin. Because I have no doubt there have been other sins committed subsequent to the garden, right? But, nothing that had been so, so remarkable as this. And nothing that God had to remark on other than, like we're talking small things in the heart, things that don't get manifest immediately. But then when we let them get out of control, they become manifest. That is the sin that brings death to us. That is what we, the whole reason we come to Christ, to alleviate us of the guilt and the punishment due. Because we are not so different. So he knows his wife again. She bears a son, calls his name Seth. For God hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. Though Cain was firstborn, people would say like, oh, but he isn't the seed of Adam. Again, who says this? The woman says it. God hath given me another seed. The seed of the woman is the point. Who is the seed of the woman in this so far? It's Seth. That's the seed of the woman. That's what we're tracing. The most important thing about the genealogy of the Old Testament is it traces the genealogy of Christ. Really. Hold on a second. I got to fix that fan. One more second. All right. Just got to hop up. It's funny. It's always a problem, but it's not always actively a problem. I don't know, this morning. All right. So, fortunately, it's not. It's fixable. Okay. So, we have Seth. He is that child of promise. That's where we're tracing. The whole point is the seed of the woman is going to crush the head of the serpent. And that controversy, that conflict that began, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. Is Cain the seed of the serpent? Yes. Not literally, but because he has taken on the sin. He's embraced his sin nature is what I would say for the most part. And you see this a lot, because people will change the rule. That's not how we do things here. Like the Spartans, right? People always talk about, this is Sparta. I have one of the old books, and it's funny because I was reading about these people called the Lacedaemonians. And I had no idea the Lacedaemonians was Sparta. And I didn't know that was like some other name for them, but whatever. And I was reading about it, and they had no adultery in that city because they outlawed it. There was no such thing as adultery because any man could sleep with any other man's wife. And they were to not cause any ruckus about it. And you can have your conscience seared with a hot iron and come up with new rules and tramp things down and make a society that's made in the corrupt image of Cain and of Satan. Hath God said, is that really okay? Is that, we have to do it? Is that, that's right? We can't do it the other way? Says who? Where's God? Where's God to say no? Says your conscience, your conscience. Stop being old-fashioned. So Abel is seen as that righteous seed because he was already pleasing God. He was already pleasing God. And why? Because, his relationship with God was somehow right. When he made those sacrifices, they were acceptable. Cain's were not. Is that to do with the nature? Well, yes, it has something to do with the nature of what they bring, but it isn't just the mere fact that he was a farmer, I think. I think that a farmer could bring an acceptable sacrifice. For example, if he needs to make some sort of blood offering, he could purchase it with his grain. And, if that... So I'm not quite... I don't know how to judge that. I've often said that Cain didn't bring the right kind of offering. Like in my old studies, I certainly said that. And I kind of laid off that a bit because I'm not sure how much that applies. So, right, where do they get those? Is this something that they came up with? Conceivably? Because you think about it. The Cain and Abel bringing their offering before the Lord is the most natural thing in the world. My children bring offerings to me. I've got them post. I got little cards. They do things. Look what I did. I bring offerings to the Lord. Not blood offerings and stuff like that, but I do works that I want God to find acceptable. I want him to find the study acceptable, right? That's why I try to make it. That's why I make it as honest as I can. I don't just try. I make it as honest as I can. I said the honesty is more important to me than pretending like I know everything. I'm sure it's important to you, too, because it's like you will know things I don't know. Sometimes you might be, like I said, sometimes people will be screaming things at the screen. Oh, well, that's what this is. So that he is that seed of the woman. She is the one who is talking about the seed she has lost. Cain is also, I've gotten a man from the Lord. That is her man. She views that as something she has obtained. But, in fact, Cain means acquisition. And I forgot what Abel means. It means something like transitory. The names actually kind of they play into the story. Like Abel's not going to be around very long. But even so, he was righteous. But he died. The righteous perisheth. And no man layeth it to heart. The righteous and the merciful men are taken away. None considering the righteous are taken away from the evil to come. Sometimes it's our time because the Lord... Our life is finished, and we think we don't want to go. We don't want to leave people behind. But, if we have faith, we can trust that it's okay. It's okay. It's like, but still, it feels, I want to finish the works. I don't want to be, if I was perfect, I suppose I'd be comfortable. If I felt like, I'm ready to be offered. Yes, sirree. Yes, sirree. Ready to be offered. Not yet. I'm mentally, as far as I'm prepared in the sense of willing, but not in the sense of wait, I have things I want to do. I don't mean earthly things, like I want to go visit the Grand Canyon again or something like that. There's services I want to render, so that I want more time. But Abel did not, he was done. And Cain went on and had a family and all that. But God appointed another seed instead, Seth. And to him there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. So again, I'm glad I waited to the end here, because it's this is very early. Adam, Seth, Enos. By Enos' grandson, men begin to call upon the name of Yahweh, or Yahweh, or however you want to say it. Jehovah. The Tetragrammaton, as they call it. Now, we've had the Lord previously. It says the Lord, the Lord, the Lord all over the place. And I haven't really remarked on that because it's quite significant. People actually divide up the book of Genesis based on the usage of Elohim and the usage of Yahweh, because they look at that as separate sources. I think, well, like I said, one of the things I say we're about to dive into these, and this is probably a good time to say it, as we dive into the genealogies. One, I don't get into studying the book based on those sources, if at all, that is at all to be considered. I do consider such things because, I don't think it's like, oh, we shouldn't consider it. It's like, well, why not? People often say, well, Moses wrote the Pentateuch. That's what we believe. Just like we believe Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John wrote those books. But we don't know that for sure, really. And it's not just because we automatically should doubt such things. It's because literally the oldest versions they don't have their names on it. It's a traditional application. Same thing with the Pentateuch. Traditionally, it's ascribed to Moses. The book of Genesis doesn't say, I, Moses, wrote all this. Or I, Moses, even compiled all this. Which I think is probably a more likely thing. I do think Moses probably put the Pentateuch together. That makes a lot of sense to me. People think it happened in Babylon. I think things happened in Babylon, no doubt. But the law was found before they even were taken away to Babylon. And it makes sense because the prophets refer to it. The prophet, like Isaiah, in the early part of Isaiah, makes references to things in the law that if the law didn't exist, and that's one of the things that E.W. Bullinger points out is all the references to the Pentateuch in the Old Testament, because it's significant. Because people who doubt when the Pentateuch was written will question it based on, saying, oh, it all came together in Babylon. I hear that all the time from people who don't know what the hell they're talking about. Because a lot of scholars who are not believers, they accept as their default position the most radically skeptical view of the scriptures. And I'm all for being somewhat skeptical of our interpretations. And even of perhaps things like these numbers, I'm certainly skeptical of. And I'm going to show you why in a second here. I'm going to mute this and we're going to not mute. We're going to keep we're going to mute that fan is what we're going to do, but I'm not going to be on the screen doing it. That's just because I don't want you to have to look at my horrible plaid pants I wear when I do these studies. They're loud and they're plaid. And it's just too much for the human mind to have to comprehend, I think, in this at this time. So, what about the genealogies? All right, first, before we do a verse-by-verse analysis of chapter 5, which is going to be fast because it's a lot of the same stuff over and over again, right? I looked into this. Now I know. Basically, the difference between the Septuagint, the Masoretic text, and then the Samaritan Pentateuch is another issue. But in that order, from the Septuagint to the Masoretic text to the Samaritan Pentateuch, 3 different versions of the Old Testament that we have. Versions that have copies that are, it's all considered, all right, this is the Pentateuch, this is the Masoretic text. These are fairly stable versions of the Bible, but they do differ. And one of the ways in which they differ is in this genealogy in chapter 5. The Apostle Paul says us not to give heed to endless genealogies, which minister questions. So there's an aspect to this that ministers questions. And I put it right down to that aspect of like trying to look at the Bible as if it was written by scientists is not a good idea. And you because I consider the fact that like each of these patriarchs, starting with Adam lived 130 years, and the Pentateuch 230 years, right? That's what it says in the Pentateuch. He lived 230 years, and then he had Seth. That's another 100 years, and that's when Seth's life starts, 100 years later. So that 100 year is cumulative. Meaning it doesn't overlap with each person. It drives each person further out. And there's 100 years added to almost all of these patriarchs. I'll tell you which ones. Adam gets 100 years before he begets Seth. Seth gets 100 years. Not to his total lifespan, but just to the lifespan, just to when he was born in relationship to Adam. But that shifts everything. It shifts everything. It makes the whole chronology of the Bible longer. And the creation isn't in 404 BC. It ends up in 5 or whatever, 5,000 something, whatever. If you're going to, again, I don't advise that. All right, Seth, he gets, 190 years when he begets Canaan. Canaan is 170 when he begets Mahaliel, that one. There's a couple where it's different. Mahaliel lives 165 years before he begat Jared in the Septuagint. And Mahaliel, Jared 162 remains the same. Mahaliel is 165. Jared 162. That's unchanged from the Septuagint to the Masoretic text. No change. Enoch 65 years, 165 years in the Septuagint. All these patriarchs, except I think up to Methuselah. Now my brain's getting a little. I know it gets fuzzy around Methuselah. No. And also no on Lamech. Wait, let me double check. There was one that was really old, and I got this. And I'll let you know. I got this from Bible.ca, and there's a nice little chart here. This guy does this nice little. Who did it? I'll give him credit because this is the person I relied on for the information. Steve Rudd. But this is not information. This is information about actual. Now he comes down on the Septuagint is right. That's the right one. And that's not what I'm saying, by the way. What I'm saying is this calls the whole chronology into question. Just the fact. Here's the little graph. As you see, Jared is unchanged. Methuselah is unchanged. But all the other patriarchs, you see that's 65 in yellow, that's Enoch. 65 in the middle column is the Masoretic text. So you see Adam 230 years. This is a little opaque to look at. It's easier when I just explain it. But like they add, on the left side, you can see the Septuagint translated from the Hebrew long before the Masoretic text came into being. Again, it was, as it says, corrupted 150 AD. That's his opinion. And I have suggested the same about the Masoretic text. What I don't know is what he says here, correct original. Is it? Is that the correct original? Because what I'm saying here is, and if you look at the Samaritan Pentateuch on the right, again, total years, even less. Because what did they do? Why is that? They shaved 100 years off of Jared's life before he had. They're like, he had the kid when he was 62, actually. Now, I'm going to say is like, how do I know it wasn't 1,062? And just because it seemed weird to scribes that they decided to start shaving those numbers off. Just to help the word of God. Because they think they know what they're doing. The world hasn't been here that long. We gotta fix that. How do we know? How do I know? It's on what I'm saying is the oldest version contains the longest period. And the time keeps shrinking. On the newer versions. Oh, actually, that's gotta be wrong. Oh, no. Why has it changed that? Oh, because this has got to be wrong. Oh, no, 303. I don't know. That's got to be. He must have did his math wrong. Oh, never mind what I'm looking at. Just the Samaritan Pentateuch, whatever. Anyways. So, it's precisely the numbers. Precisely the genealogies that I don't trust. That's what I say. I don't see how you can build a whole ministry based on we got to rely on these numbers. Really? Yeah, I can't even be certain you have the right numbers because an older version of the text contains a different set of numbers, and numbers happen to be they didn't have or the Hebrews didn't use numbers like we did, as far as they didn't have the Arabic letter numbering system that we use now with the 10 digits, including the 0, obviously, because the Arabs invented the 0, right? So when you had numbers, they use a different system. At one point, I studied it briefly, but it's based on their lettering, and it can be, when you look at it, there are several examples in numbers that have been There's like, oh, this like a number where it's like a huge number in the King James, and then they found better manuscripts down the road, and they're like, oh, it's not supposed to be 3 million, it's supposed to be 3,000. Oh, of course, that makes more sense. And so numbers get jacked up sometimes in the copying of old texts. Because they didn't have a good numbering system, things get jacked up. And that's why I do not trust the numbering system that was handed down to us. We have three different ones. And how do I know that, that, people would say like, well, Paul, if you call that into question, you could call the whole thing into question. That's fine. Call it all into question. Because my faith is not merely in the integrity of the book. It's in the integrity of the Spirit, because the Spirit that brought it about is active and living in the world as Christ is enthroned at the right hand of God. A lot of people don't really believe this, I think. And so that, they become dogmatic about things like, well, we absolutely got to rigorously apply this. We're going to dogmatically and literally interpret something that we have three different versions of. And it's numbers and stuff. And it's part of genealogy, something we were specifically warned about to not give heed to. I say, well, wait, the Bible genealogies aren't endless. No genealogies are endless. The point is that's called hyperbole. He's exaggerating a little to make a point that genealogies can end up being an endless mess. If you get, it's like, let's not get into the genealogies. Let's not get into all these numbers. As far as we're going to try to add them all up and find out. Because you know why? I'll show you later. There's also missing names that we know we have evidence of missing names. So when we have missing generations, what do we do then? So, oh no, they're not missing. God wouldn't let that happen. Why wouldn't he let it happen? Why? Tell me. Especially when the Holy Spirit said, don't give heed to endless genealogies. And do you think he was talking about some other genealogies outside the Bible? Because people get hung up on this stuff. They do. Hung up on it. You get so hung up, counting the numbers, figuring out, and the same thing with like people who try to figure out when Jesus is going to come. That's what Arnold Murray early in his ministry, he had a ministry after. It's amazing that he had a successful ministry for years after predicting the end of the world falsely. And I have a little article about that. But in what led him to it, it all seemed so plausible. It was playing with the numbers. And the sieges are a perfect overlay. I remember saying a perfect overlay of modern events. And so if that's the case, well then, Satan's going to appear in 1981 or whatever. 82, 81, I forgot. Because that's how much I think about that stuff now. I've exercised my mind of it. I really am not. People used to say, oh, you're just obsessed about them. Nope. That's all. I just exercised myself of all those. Not everything. There's still a few items I might go back to, but for the most part, yep. We're fine. So, these names in chapter 5, the descendants of Adam, these are the inheritors, because he begat sons and daughters. It is implied that these are the firstborns, but I would caution against assuming that. One, because the men are so old. Now, we assume Cain is the firstborn, right? And then the next child born was Abel, and then Seth. And that could all be, and then, because Seth being conceived after Abel was slain, one, he may have been conceived before Abel was slain, but was appointed the seed afterwards, I guess. Though it seems like right at his birth, right? Nah, that's probably not very good. I mean, that would be stretching it, right? I think so. So, I mean, I would be more inclined to think that Seth was born right at that time. Oh, we talked about, I find I jumped right past the calling on the name of the Lord. Boy. Men began to call on the name of the Lord. Could be both negative or positive. It could be that they begin to call God by name, but it is often implied, well, it has been suggested that they begin to call other things by the name of the Lord. Or they begin to profanely call upon the name of the Lord. You know what I mean? Because, like, the idea is that, well, Abel was not Abel. What is new? You know what I mean? Originally, man was in communion with God in the garden. I'm going to fix that. You know, man was in communion with God in the garden. And, right? And then when man got out of the garden, God made skins and drove man out. But God is still interacting with men. We know this because of Cain, right? Cain and Abel bring their offering to the Lord, and the Lord regards Abel's offering. So there is a relationship with God being practiced, right? That was one of the questions. Where is this coming from exactly? Well, it must be instituted from the very beginning and understood. As I've said, in some ways, it's the most natural thing in the world, like parents obeying their children. If you have access to God, or even if, like, let's say Cain and Abel, like, God isn't just walking among them like in the garden, right? But he's still as present as he is now, and is willing to speak to any of us as he is now, because he is. He doesn't necessarily do it every day. In the Bible, people will say, in the Bible, it seems like miracles are happening all the time. If you think about how much history it covers, that's not true. The miracles are still extremely rare. It's just the Bible captures a lot of them, right? They're recorded there. But it's not like it's happening all the time. No. So their offering is acceptable in some way. God has, this is known that he regards their offering, whether that be through the Spirit or whether God actually makes some sort of visible, like when Elijah offers the offering and the fire comes down from heaven from God to accept it. We don't know. But it was somehow known that it was accepted. And Cain, in some ways, maybe in his conscience is where God is speaking to him. We don't know. But in his conscience would tell him, this is not an acceptable offering. He would be convicted. He would know. He would see Abel's offering and then see his own and say, like, this is not, and then when God confirms that, the Lord doesn't even, like the way sometimes a mom, oh, it's wonderful, Johnny. But dad will be like, this is terrible. A lot of times people, like my kids, will wrestle and sometimes they do a great job and I tell them. But sometimes they don't. And I tell them. And other people will be like, oh, you did a great job. I'm like, don't listen to them. That wasn't great. I know what a great effort looks like, even in a losing effort. But that wasn't it. And that, I'm not cruel with that, but sometimes it takes a little bit of harshness, right? Because you need to do well. You know why? It's about your life. If you do not well, sin is lying at the door. It's going to eat you up, man. And that's the point. We need to call upon the name of the Lord for our salvation, but men call upon the name of the Lord for all kinds of garbage, don't they? And I think the idea that Enos, it's like the grandson. That's at the time. Something's changed, There's enough men. They're calling out to God by name, seeking him. Maybe it's because that's when God becomes, in his days, God sort of, where is he? It seems like God has forsaken the earth. Adam knew him. Maybe, Abel and Cain had seen him. Not necessarily seen, but right. But they had encountered God in some way, shape, or fashion, right? There had been encounters with God. But then men began to call on God. Maybe that is some sort of indicative of God's absence or seeming, like I said, as it is now. We don't always feel his presence. Except by the Spirit. Like average people. Sometimes people do feel God's presence. Maybe someone rarely feels like they always feel God's presence. I know some people are really spiritual, right? Sometimes I want to make room because I don't want people to be like, well, I feel, I know people are more spiritual than me, that's for sure. And some people are really super spiritual. I don't want to take that away from anyone. But let's not be prideful in it either, right? We want to have our feet firmly where they belong We still have them on earth. Everyone needs their feet washed. Remember that. Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, so we ought to do for one another. Remember, we all need it. I think that is the humility that he showed in washing the feet was supposed to be for us to just simply realize that everybody needs their feet washed. The Lord himself, his feet were dirty. When he walked, he didn't walk above the earth. He walked right in the dust. The woman brought in the oil and anointed his feet and washed them with her tears. Okay, so we addressed the genealogy in the large sense, and we talked about the amount of years. It adds over 1,000 years, ultimately. You can look into that deeper. I'm not, like I said, all that says to me is that, okay, I'm not going to, the idea that I should add all this up, or even the Septuagint version, and then I should take that somewhere and say, okay, this is exactly how old the earth is, I think that's a mistake. It would be useful in dating the flood. And my problem with it is I think the reason that people really focus on the Septuagint one is because the Masoretic text really creates problems as far as the building of the pyramids, because they are older than the flood in the Masoretic text, essentially. And so that's a problem. Problem is there are things that are older than the pyramids on the earth, and places that are older, like Göbekli Tepe, more ancient and been there for a long time. Like we're getting close to the flood, right? We've run right up against Noah. So let's look at the genealogy and pick out the things that beyond just the years and all this. We note that each of the patriarchs dies, and he died, and he died, and he died, and he died. I think one of the anomalies that they believe was trying to be corrected for in the... I'm trying to remember what it was. Let me see. Someone is supposedly... I think it was... I forgot how it ends up. One of them ends up living past the flood. Like their lifespan. I forgot where that is. I forgot who it was. If it was Methuselah or Lamech. I forgot who. But someone. The years of their life. Yeah. Well, like you look at the Samaritan Pentateuch. They really cut off Methuselah's life. They put him down to 720 years there. I forgot. But in the Septuagint. Someone ends up living past the flood. Where was Japheth? Again, there's lots of notes here. I'm looking. I don't want to read all this. This stuff gives me a headache. I mean, I could go back and look at it more detailed, and you could find. Like I said, I just don't think in solving those problems we get any closer to the Lord. I mean, for some people it's very important because it's an aspect of defending the text, right? But the thing is, we have a text, right, and it's fairly reliable. I think the text is reliable. But you need to rely on it for that which it was written for. I mean, you shouldn't rely on it for things like dating the earth, because that is not precisely what that genealogy is written there for. That's what I was saying also about. Oh, this is really annoying. One of the things I believe about the genealogy is I do believe, one, that the genealogy is real. It's like not made up. This is a list of ancestors. I question somewhat the numbers because obviously the texts we have existing call the numbers into question in some way. Like I said, it's like, how am I to know that before the Septuagint, the numbers weren't even more outlandish? And maybe that people didn't understand what they represented. And maybe such vast amounts of time seemed strange and odd. Or the idea that there was gaps. I often wondered if some of this stuff is like to fill in gaps. So, well, how old were they? Originally maybe it was just a list of ancestors. Like in Cain's ancestry, there's no ages and stuff. In Adam's, all these ages come into play. And they're remarkably long ages. So it's very interesting. Like, is that literally their lifespan, or is it representing an age that they sort of represented or something? I don't know. Like I said, I'd like to interpret it other ways, but I don't know how to go with it. And again, it would minister more questions than answers, anything that I could suggest. So let's look at the aspects of the genealogy that we can make comment about, right? We can say a lot about. 1, Enoch walked with God, the 7th from Adam. Right? Was there anything before that? Where is it? Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared. Nope, Enoch. He walked with God. It says, he has shown thee, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of thee, but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with thy God. To walk with God, one, is a humble thing. It should be humbling. To walk with God is to walk with, someone who is, it's like walking with a parent. It should not be, well, if we truly walk with God, we can't be lifted up with pride. I remember when I talked about holiness and righteousness and obtaining these things, a friend of mine said, well, you won't be able to because then you'll be proud. And granted, pride is something we need to definitely be on guard for. But I found that the pride is something you deal with way ahead of ever getting close to perfection. You have to that once you get close to perfection, pride is usually one of the enemies you've vanquished long ago, as far as I'm concerned, because it's a much bigger issue than the kind of things you end up looking at once you've dealt with once the Lord has set right. Our hearts are mostly right with God. We have not given, we've repudiated and absolutely turned our backs on the works of darkness, at least in our hearts, right? And so, we're not like that. We we desire to walk with God humbly, not to be like, hey, I walk with God. Why do we want to walk with God? Well, because to know his ways and to be obedient to them is life. And that's what it seems Enoch discovered. Because it says he walked with God and he was not, for God took him. Now there's a book of Enoch that people often talk about. I had a copy of it. I really should go read it because apparently that is the book that was quoted in the New Testament. They say it's, often people say there's a problem with Jude because it quotes the apocryphal book of Enoch. There's different ways you could look at that. You could say like, well, the book of Enoch may not have been written by Enoch, but it contained a tradition about Enoch that does go back to Enoch. You could say that, or part of a tradition. But then the question is how much of that tradition is intact and how much of that is maybe a bit of, I don't know what you'd call it. Like, I don't want to call it fantasy entirely, but fanciful imagination, intruding into those things which he hath not seen. And that's always a danger because, here's the thing about the Word of God and all that. Many men have desired to be prophets of God. And there's a lot of reasons why people desire to be prophets of God. Foremost is because of status. It's something that impresses people. Can be led by a prophet, by one who speaks for God, and the power that one can wield in the name of God over other people is a very tempting thing for people. For some people, because they want to wield power over people, and so they can use God to do that, and they often do. And this is something people point out. They say religion is just to control people. That's a lie. But people use religion to control people. They use the authority of religion to control people. They use authority, period, to control people. It's true. During the COVID pandemic, they used religion to control people. The government. It instituted essentially a religion of COVID-19 that was based not on science, but on fake, just stuff they made up. Like 6 foot of distance. That was made up. That was plausibility, not science. They just made that up. Same thing with the safety of the vaccine. A lot of the data was not available. So they make up things. Lie. Make up religion. Because it's like it's how you ought to live. Oh, this is the righteous thing to do. Do it for you're not getting that shot for yourself. You're getting it for everybody else. And that's a lie. Because it doesn't work like that. It's not that kind of a thing, right? So he was not, for God took him. And often people, well, I talk about the resurrection of the dead because I believe in the resurrection of the dead. That is how we are going to encounter Christ ultimately. Whether we live and are alive until his coming and will be changed, we will be changed into that same status that all the dead will be changed into when they rise. And so we wait for that. I believe in the resurrection of the dead. But people often will say, if you think the dead are waiting for the resurrection and they're not like consciously already alive again and with God consciously now in our time, while we're on earth here, they're in a parallel exact same moment as us. Again, this gets complicated because like people are so used to thinking of time in this very linear way. I am from the foundation of the world. I am with God in the heavenlies. I am victorious with him in Christ because that was his word from the beginning. And that I trust in that. That's what gives me great confidence to do what's right because I know I can. I can be victorious over. I have the power to do everything I want to do in God. And I know I can say because everything I want is everything he says that I should do. And it's very encouraging when you want that truly. What do you want and why? Why do you walk? Why are you trying to draw near to God? Why do you want the knowledge that God can give you? What is the purpose? Is it to lead men, to make yourself something in front of people? Is that what you seek? What is it? That's an important question. I come to do thy will should be our answer, though. Why? Because what else? What else? Why? What else is there to do? Really? I want to live. I want to live. Not because I fear death, but because I want to live. Because I embrace that active principle of life. I want it. I want to embark on the creative adventure that the Lord has embarked on. I want to join him in whatever it is he's up to. Because it seems like he gets up to some amazing things. And so Enoch walked with God. And God took him. Now, when I talk about why did I bring up the resurrection? Because they'll say, well, what about Enoch? What about Enoch? That's exceptional. He didn't die. It doesn't say he died. Elijah, they'll also point out, Elijah went up by a whirlwind. I remember I had a friend who suggested, well, maybe he came back down and died later somewhere else. I guess. It doesn't, that's a lot of supposition. The Bible leaves us often places where we can go into supposition. Like a lot of like I said, there were some very thought-provoking questions asked about the nature of sin and Cain and man and all that. Like what makes us good or bad? Quote unquote, we're all bad, but we're not all bad, are we? Right? We haven't all gone the way of Cain. We've kind of gone the way of Cain, but not entirely. But Jesus has said, right? Hey, if you're even thinking about it, you're already consider yourself on the path. So, I do not consider myself better because under the right circumstances, I'd probably do the same or similar things. Especially if I was blinded. Because sometimes, our knowledge of the Lord saves us from doing things that other people are judged for. There's definitely that. So Enoch going to God, that's exceptional. That doesn't happen to everybody. That's not what happens when you die. That's what happened to Enoch when he walked with God. Perhaps God decided that he would inherit. Now it's weird because now it says of Jesus, right? In when he's talking to Nicodemus about being born again, he declares that no man hath ascended into heaven except he that came down from heaven, even the Son of Man, which is in heaven. And again, that's not Jesus talking, that's the gospel speaking of Jesus, I should say. He, after he ascended, it was declared that he had come down first and that no other man had ascended except him. Well, you say, well, what about Elijah? What about Enoch? Well, Enoch did not ascend. Elijah did not ascend because Christ ascended in victory like a conqueror into heaven. You know what I mean? Like Caesar entering Rome, crossing the Rubicon to be emperor. That's what Jesus did and no one enters into heaven like that. We will, oh, when the saints go marching in, oh, when the saints go, we're going to march into heaven victoriously with him, so to speak. I don't know because again, he's returning to the earth. We will be part of his triumphant return, really, is the way I look at it. But in triumph. But the point is, no one who has gone into heaven was going there in triumph. Enoch did not overcome death. Not for everybody in the world. You know what I mean? He walked with God, and God took him. He did not ascend, he was lifted. He was lifted. And say, well, God raised up Jesus. I guess so. It is somewhat contradictory, isn't it? But what I would say is that exceptions are exceptions because they're not the rule. You know what I mean? That's what makes them exceptional. So what happened with Elijah and Enoch really says nothing about what happens to people when they die. Because Elijah and Enoch are exceptional in that there is no real sort of death. Also, I don't know. Again, and people point out also like things like the Mount of Transfiguration. We talk about that in our talks about, like I have a paper called I Believe in Death and in the Resurrection of the Dead, which I talk about that somewhat. These are difficult questions. It's not, it's not cut and dry that it's easy. But my plea to the other side would be like, well, what do you do about all my passages that cast doubt on your view? What happens is I find they don't do anything about them. They just brush them aside. Well, I have explanations for all the passages that call my view into question. I can give you some sort of explanation. Well, I think we need to hear the explanation for my passages, and then people can judge which explanations are most plausible, which ones make the most sense, which ones the Spirit says are the truth. And that's the most important thing. We got to seek the Spirit, because he will guide us into all truth, as the Lord Jesus promised. If we look to the Spirit, that's why I don't like things like written commentaries. If you look at my website, my doctrinal statement is pretty thin. I try to keep it very every Christian type thing, because I don't want to exclude people based on really specific doctrines. I want to keep people focused on Jesus as the center of our faith and as the center of the story of the Scriptures. Jesus means we don't have to be as good as Enoch or as close to God as Elijah. We don't have to be a great prophet or an amazing patriarch, who found somehow God's mercy to the degree that God took him out of this world. He took him out of this world. I don't know. He may have died afterwards, but God took him. He wasn't found anymore. We all assume he's still alive, right? That's the presumption. But if he is, I don't know. Maybe eventually he went to sleep too and waits for the resurrection. I don't know. I don't know. All those questions can't all be answered, But someday they will. That's why I want to be in the resurrection, because I want answers to all my questions. And I think at the white throne, the questions will be going in the other direction. So I don't think I want to be there. I'd rather go to the judgment seat of Christ, get my works burned on the altar, and then let's go on and see what's in the treasures. Okay? Let's go see what he's got in the back. All right. My text. Okay. Methuselah lived after he begat. Oh, I'm already over. Well, we're done, right? Okay, let me just double check here. 969. Oh, what? Lamech, comfort us. Okay. We're going to be... we're going to begin with Noah 5:29. I think that's a good place to begin tomorrow, right? As far as that's where we're going to begin analysis. After Lamech begets Noah. And the things that are said about Noah, because we haven't commented on those. And there's not much. And then we'll go right into chapter 6. We're going to talk about the flood. And again, like I said, I don't take all these dates and add them up because I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's what Moses or Abraham, like I said, I have no doubt that Moses put the books of the law together. I don't think he necessarily authored it all. You know? I think this, because I do think these, like that genealogy of Adam, you know where that comes from? Noah. That's where it comes from. Noah brought down that genealogy. That's how they knew it. Because they used to have oral traditions. They didn't have to, it might have been written down. I don't know. People would say there was no writing at that time. Again, and that's quite possibly true. But certainly there was oral tradition, and oral traditions can be very strong. Some of the oldest stuff in the New Testament is considered the oral traditions that are recorded. You might think, oral traditions in the New Testament? Yeah. Like when he would say, this is the gospel that I communicated to you from the beginning, that Christ died, he rose again, etc., etc. All these certain aspects have the formula of a oral recitation. And same thing with the genealogy. It was originally oral, I have no doubt. A lot of this was originally oral, especially the early Genesis stuff. And I think early stuff is going to be brought through by Noah. I don't know why we ascribe it all to Moses, as if that was the point. Someone was asking, well, what about religion in the time of Adam? Well, there had to be some sort of oral tradition of religion that was passed down from Adam, Seth, Enos, Canaan, right? Mahaliel, Enoch, Jared, whatever. Right? Methuselah. There has to be some sort of passing down of this knowledge. Even though Adam is still alive quite into many of these people's lifetimes, still that is being reiterated orally and being taught orally. And it's being corrupted through that also, because people either... Now, people who are faithful to a tradition, they can, like we all remember the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the Republic, right? Because if we said it in school day after day like I did, I could never forget it. And there are some things like that. You repeat it over and over and over, unless you just, like I memorized all the patriarchs and the genealogies at one point, right? I memorized all the kings of Israel and Judah. I knew them all in order and how many years they reigned. But because I didn't continually recite that for a longer period of time, because I only doubled up till I just had it memorized, and then I let it slide. You have to memorize it, and then you have to pummel yourself with it over and over and over again. That's why I do the music. I'm sorry the quality isn't always better, and I'm working on more songs, but that's why I do it, so you can pummel the word into your brain. And it's very useful because it does put that word in us. Even if we don't remember the addresses and stuff, man, you get the word of God floating around in your head. That's the best thing you could have. All right, so we're going to begin with Noah tomorrow. Until then, thank you for joining me. I look forward to being back in tomorrow and doing that study. Here we go.
In that day shall the branch of the Lord be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and comely for those that escape of Israel. And it shall come to pass that he that is left in Zion, and he that remains in Jerusalem, shall be called holy, even everyone that is counted among the living in Jerusalem.